Honourable Member Central, Okanagan, Similkameen, Nicola.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and it's certainly a great honor to join in this debate in this chamber. Before I get into the meat of the issue with C-58, I just would like to extend to both all the people that work in this chamber, Madam Speaker, and also those that will be working in the Senate or the other place after, a very Merry Christmas. It is that time of year. And while there doesn't seem to be a lot of charity in this room right now towards one another, I do hope that when we're back in our ridings and we've had a moment to acclimatize ourselves to our communities, that we have that spirit. One of my previous members talked about the need to help support people that are experiencing massive inflation and how difficult it is for many of our residents, whether they be pensioners on fixed incomes, whether they be families that have work or families that don't. This is a very tough economy, and right now, as we see through our food banks, this is a very tough time, and I encourage all Canadians to do what they can if they're in a position to help. Madam Speaker, prior to writing down a few comments from my notes on this debate, I took some time to review some of the other comments in Hansard on this particular topic. Now, it was very interesting to note that when the Liberals had a majority from 2015 to 2019, they had very little enthusiasm for a bill of this nature. And more so, since recently the Liberals have a sudden interest in this bill, I have noticed a pattern. Often when a Liberal member speaks of this bill, the topic of replacement workers, that conversation with the Liberals will quickly shift to what the leader of the official opposition, as in the Conservatives, has to think or say about this bill. From reading the comments from various Liberal members, it is almost as if the bill is more about what will the leader of the opposition do than it is about banning replacement workers. Never before has this Liberal government appeared more obsessed with wondering how the opposition leader will respond. And further to that, I can almost hear some tears from the Prime Minister's office when they learn that the opposition's view on this bill, Madam Speaker. We keep getting questions from people on the other side about it, and we've been taking our time to study the legislation, Madam Speaker, because, this applies to every single category under federal workers. Now, I haven't seen in my time as Member of Parliament where there was a massive strike at a federally regulated bank, nor have I seen it at some of the other sectors, Madam Speaker. And let's just bear in mind that of the total workforce that this type of legislation would apply to, it is only 10%, roughly, or less. And, we might lament that there are not more federally regulated workers, but each one of those workers is important. But many of them might ask themselves, will this legislation materially affect my situation? Now, we might have different views from different perspectives of different industries, the nuclear industry. I haven't done that outreach with those folks that are federally regulated that would be expected to work under this, probably because it has not been a number one on their minds. But, Madam Speaker, what I have heard in my own riding, that I'm sure that many federally regulated workers, particularly those that are, we would say, are working, that are middle class or those working hard to join it, is they find themselves in a precarious situation. Why? Well, interest rates have gone up. So those who are fortunate enough to have a home right now are asking, can they maintain that home as their mortgage comes due for renewal? Madam Speaker, that's a difficult decision, because even if someone has to sell their home, where do they go? Right now, rents have doubled under this government. So regardless of whether they work in, or these applications of C-58 would apply to them or not, that is not going to help them materially in that decision. Now, there are other people, Madam Speaker, that are working but don't have a home. And they're either subject to precarious situations where they're renting, oftentimes putting themselves in just so that they can put a roof over their head, not knowing when that will come due. Many of them are young and have dreams about home ownership. That has been washed away by this economy under this particular government. And you know what, Madam Speaker, when they see and they hear articles and little snippets oftentimes online where the Governor of the Bank of Canada says, that inflation could be better if there wasn't contrary monetary policy to fiscal policy, and fiscal policy is the direct area of this government, they wonder if their government is really on their side. And Madam Speaker, they can put up things like C-58 to say that, but that still doesn't materially help them deal with it. Now again, Madam Speaker, there's the issue of gas prices, there's the issues of groceries, and we all know that the carbon tax affects that greatly. And Madam Speaker, we've all heard about that Ottawa mushroom farm and a $100,000 carbon tax bill. Now, the Prime Minister has been asked 5 times about how that bill gets paid, and he can't answer. But the rest of us all know, Madam Speaker, that the bill just simply gets handed to customers. Many of them are those very same workers that this particular government.
Point of order, the honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
I haven't actually seen any news that says that there's a strike at that mushroom farm, so I'm not sure what he's talking about. We're dealing with anti-scab legislation, not mushroom farm.
Point of debate and not a point of order. Yeah, again, it's a point of debate, not a point of order. And I just want to remind members, when they rise on points of order, they should actually indicate which standing order that they are rising on. The honourable member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
Thanks again, Madam Speaker. And again, when it comes to the mushroom farm, we know the bill simply gets handed down to customers and makes those Ontario-grown mushrooms that much more expensive, which is causing the issue that we see today in Canada's labour market, where right now, when there's open negotiations for unions are rightfully saying the cost of living has gone up. And of course, there is pressure for those workers to receive more. And Madam Speaker, that's the reason why we're here today, is because this government ultimately has created an environment where it doesn't work. And so instead of actually addressing the issue, instead of addressing it by reducing their inflationary deficits, instead of getting rid of their plan to quadruple the carbon tax, raising it essentially by 62 cents a litre, instead of doing those things that would tangibly affect every single Canadian, including those that are federally regulated under this particular piece of legislation, C-58. Instead, they just decide to throw this out, something that they've opposed long before. And that is why we cannot let workers and Canadians' families fall behind. And we always know that this always be spending, Liberal-NDP costly coalition will continue to be part of the problem and not the solution. Now, getting back to the bill. And this legislation will potentially impact some of Canada's largest airports and ports, far more severely in big cities like Montreal than it will in any city in my riding. That is not to say that labor disruptions in federally regulated sectors do not have an impact across our country, as they most certainly do. However, I'm just recognizing that some of Canada's largest cities, most often representing MPs from the government side, they will typically deal with a federal labor disruption far more firsthand than those of us who have rural communities in our ridings. So, as a BC-based MP who represents some federally regulated workers, Madam Speaker, I do ask these questions about the government's approach. Why are they, instead of addressing the main key concerns about the inflation that we're suffering, why are they not addressing the root causes instead of just finding these small bills that only affect a very small amount of our population? Increasingly, with this Liberal government, we just see that they are totally out of touch where Canadians are struggling. And, Madam Speaker, when Canadians, and particularly the citizens of my riding, when I see them in the coffee shops, they often will simply say, "Where are my tax dollars going now, Dan? Are you getting good value for money?" And the answer is, Madam Speakers, we just don't know. For example, in Ontario, there are 2 different electric vehicle plants. Now, I, as a Conservative, love to see different competing technologies fight to see who has the best mousetrap to serve the population. But, Madam Speaker, when we suddenly add the extra element of where it's the taxpayer and the government are actually writing big checks to subsidize certain activities, we start to come into the, Madam Speaker, where people resent that they don't actually know the business case. They don't actually know what the contract is for these large deals. And when they see that we are bringing in people from outside of Canada, when in my province, When BC LNG was proposed, Madam Speaker, I met with unions who said, we're prepared to work. We have the expertise, even though they had not done one before. Steel, boilermakers, etc. They all wanted those jobs. And yet we're not in a position where that today. So, Madam Speaker, rather than working for Canadian jobs and Canadian know-how and putting it to work and using their tax dollars for a better outcome, what do we get, Madam Speaker? We get a government that is focused on the wrong things, not giving those opportunities to Canadians, and instead hiding at committee with the help of other parties such as the NDP to block those contracts from being presented. I lament that. I do hope we have another chance to debate this bill so we can get into the meat of the bill, Madam Speaker.